regard to Mitra, some of you have heard it, he speaks at a lot of conferences and extremely engaging. He's now nicknamed the Slumdog Professor because the Hole in the Wall project gave rise to the novel Q&A, which in turn gave rise to the film The Slumdog Millionaire. So he's made his name in that respect as well. But what did the research show? The idea here is that you don't put computers in schools, you put them in public playgrounds, and you put them in such a way that adults can't use them by putting them low in the wall and with some metal barrier overhead so that any adult who uses them gets a pain in their back very quickly and gives up. So you put the computer in there and then you just stand back and see what happens. And this has now been researched very extensively, not just in India, in a number of locations, but also in other countries. I'm going to abbreviate, obviously, grossly, but this has been called, it was called the hole in the wall by the press. The academics named it minimally invasive education, which is really a euphemism for saying that children can learn a great deal without any teachers involved. The idea being that teachers are invasive and let them get on with it by themselves. But what did the research show? It showed that learning happened in groups, and Mitra is quite insistent on this, which is quite interesting given that many of the national computer rollouts in schools around the world assume that unless you can give one computer to each kid, you're not going to make much progress. He would say that was actually the opposite of the truth, and unless the kids can work together on these things, you won't get as much progress as you otherwise could. Getting started is obviously a challenge with all the groups because everyone wants to hit the keyboard at once, and so the first few days of this, nothing happens because the computer's hanging, but after that the kids figure out that they've got to do it sort of one at a time, and then things start to take off. Because it's based on a group, the group membership changes constantly. People's time at the machine ranges from 5 minutes to half an hour. And these groups are constantly sort of reforming with different people coming in and going out, which means that everyone is an expert because different people have proposed different things, seen different things happening. They come back, they're stuck on something. So they say, look, well, we did this the other day. Here it was. And so that's all fine. I mean, it was clear that kids could learn about how to use computers. The question that Mitra then asked was, does this actually help with their in-school learning? And the conclusion so far is, it certainly helps them develop intellectual maturity, and it certainly helps their performance in mathematics. It doesn't seem to help their performance in other subjects, but the hypothesis Mitra has is that that's because in the other subjects, by and large, the Indian style is rote learning. The teacher tells you about history and then you give it back to him as he's told you about it. And not surprisingly, this kind of exercise doesn't actually do a great deal to help you improve your rote learning. And parents and communities like it, which is an interesting result because often parents are a bit skeptical about educational technology. And also, very important in a place like India where a lot of kids are out of school, it also, of course, brings in children who are not in school at all. So that's for the hole in the wall. I mentioned our own very recent experiment, which is more on the model of one laptop per kid. It's far too early to draw any conclusions from this, but certainly the lower the price, the better. Although always remember when you're introducing computers into school systems that the actual hardware is probably at most 20% of your costs. The rest is the infrastructure, the people and all the rest of it. But nevertheless, getting the price down to well below $100 compared to the one laptop per child project of Negroponte where the price never got below $200 obviously makes a difference to the way you can roll it out. What was nice in the Maldives was the country could use its own curriculum on this little machine. We weren't imposing anything from outside. And there was real cost reduction because this was a school that could not afford the usual complement of teachers, and they believed that by bringing these machines they can get by without the teachers that they would otherwise like to have. And so far, it's very early days. The session only started about a month and a half ago. Everyone involved seems to be very happy with what's going on. So let me stop there for that and say a bit more perhaps about the subject that I was meant to be talking about, which is in-service training for teachers using IT. In the book I have 8 sort of profiles at the end about the use of open and distance learning in particular for in-service teacher education at scale. I'm a guy who likes to have lots of zeros on the end of the number of students involved. And there have been for many years programs for the in-service training of teachers run at a distance for significant numbers. I began my own career in distance education in the early 1970s, working on a program called Permanent, whose aim was to retrain all the secondary mathematics teachers in Quebec, in Canada, in the use of what was then called the new mathematics. I believe this was a very successful program, and as I shall mention this afternoon, the performance of Quebec students in math in the PISA studies is not only the highest in Canada, but is right up there with folks like yourselves and Chinese Taipei and so on. So I believe that it left a trace. But what's perhaps interesting for today are 2 programs which do have a much more intensive use of IT than we were able to have in the 1970s, or indeed that many of the programs in countries like Pakistan can have today. And those 2 programs are the UK Open University's Teacher in Service programs, and a program called Cal State Teach, which is a program, it's an in-service program, if you like, but it's also a pre-service program, because one of the problems that California has is that something like 30,000 of its elementary school teachers are completely untrained, just pitched into the schools to get on with it. And so they've developed this program in order that they can do their training while continuing to teach on the job. And because this is California, this is quite an IT-rich sort of program that uses the web a lot and so on and so forth to enable these teachers to train. I think what's interesting about the Open Universities program is that the use of computer conferencing to try to create a community of practice among teachers. Now everyone witters on about communities of practice and how important it is, but I think the Open University learned the hard way that you don't just put people online together and say that you've created a community of practice. But I do think from the evidence they have begun to really succeed in doing so. Part of the reason they admit themselves is that they have their students for a rather longer period than would be the case in many programs. Their teacher trainees, if you like, are with them for about 18 months in the program where they use computer conferencing to create these communities of practice. So there really is an opportunity for the community to get creative and for the novices to learn from the veterans and for things to be shared in a genuine way. They would probably argue that it's extremely difficult to do that in a very short period, like a month or 2. But I think they would argue that by doing this and by creating these online communities of practice, they're actually being more effective at creating a community of practice and a sharing of expertise and knowledge among the teachers than they would be able to get in any kind of face-to-face situation. So that I've been long a strong believer that open distance learning, use of ICTs is not just a substitute for face-to-face, which will be better, but often can actually be better, because in all other areas of life, technology has revolutionised the way we do things. It's made them higher quality, usually less expensive, and more accessible to people. And it seems to me that there is an opportunity to do that in education, despite the very deep-seated feeling that education has to be individual people talking to each other in real time and looking at each other in the face. So let me stop there and see if that's provoked any thoughts on your part.
Great, well, thank you very much.